Welcome in. Welcome back into Soul Plus Systems. I'm Jen, and if you're new here, welcome in. And if you're returning, welcome back. Before I say anything else, I want to slow this moment down. It's not for drama, it's not for effect, but because speed has a way of stealing meaning if you allow it to. So if you're listening right now, wherever you are, driving, walking, cleaning, sitting still, I want you to let your shoulders drop just a little bit. Not because you're tired, but because nothing in this moment needs to be rushed. This episode exists because I reached a point of clarity that didn't come from pushing harder. It came from stopping long enough to notice what was actually happening. There's a kind of clarity that arrives loud, and then there's a kind that arrives quietly, almost unnoticed at first. This was the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't demand action immediately. The kind that doesn't come with adrenaline. The kind that simply says, you see it now. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. This week didn't give me answers in the form of breakthroughs or wins or dramatic shifts. It gave me something more useful. It gave me orientation. I noticed how my body responded to certain things. I noticed where energy was being spent without return. I noticed how often urgency tried to disguise itself as importance. And most of all, I noticed how calm returned the moment that I stopped reacting. That's what this episode is about. It's not productivity, it's not motivation, it's not grinding or hustling or reinventing yourself. It's about design. Because effort without design doesn't lead to freedom, it leads to exhaustion. And exhaustion has a way of making people question themselves. Instead of questioning the system that they're operating inside. I'm not interested in questioning myself anymore. I did that long enough. I'm interested in questioning the design. This episode is me naming what I can clearly see now and documenting the shift from reacting to intentionally building. If you've been feeling pulled in too many directions lately, and if you've been doing all the right things, but you're still feeling off, if you've been working without feeling anchored, this isn't a pep talk. It's a recalibration. Here's something that took me longer than it should have to fully internalize. Burnout is rarely caused by workload alone. Burnout comes from effort without leverage. You can work long hours and feel energized when what you're doing compounds. You can work very little and feel depleted when it doesn't. That's not a mindset issue. That's not a discipline problem. That's physics. Energy follows structure. And when your structure is misaligned, your nervous system becomes the shock absorber. And no system can do that indefinitely without consequences. What often gets labeled as burnout is actually the body saying, this design doesn't work. And instead of listening, we tend to do one of two things. We either push harder or we blame ourselves. Neither solves the problem. I've learned that when something consistently drains you and produces no structural gain, it doesn't need more motivation. It needs redesign or removal. This applies to workflows. It applies to communication patterns. It applies to how you structure your week. It applies to how many decisions you force yourself to make daily. Every unnecessary decision taxes you. Every unclear expectation leaks energy. Every system that depends on you being on all the time will eventually fail. Not because you failed, but because the system was poorly designed. Burnout isn't a character flaw, it's feedback. And feedback is only useful if you're willing to respond strategically instead of emotionally. I had to learn that one. For me, that meant asking the harder questions. Where am I expending effort that doesn't build leverage? Not where am I tired, not where am I frustrated, but where's my effort not producing a future return? And once you ask that question honestly, things start to reorganize themselves. Some commitments lose their importance. Some tasks stop feeling urgent. Some conversations no longer require participation. It's not avoidance, that's discernment. There's a massive difference between reacting to your life and designing it. Reactions feel fast, and design, well, it feels deliberate. Reaction thrives on urgency. Design thrives on clarity. And when you're reacting, everything feels immediate. And when you're designing, everything gets placed. Reaction asks, what do I need to deal with right now? Design asks, what system would make this unnecessary in the future? And quite literally, that single shift changes everything. I realized that a lot of my own energy wasn't being spent on creation. It was being spent on response and bleeding my energy. Responding to noise, responding to chaos, and responding to expectations, responding to situations that didn't deserve as much access as they had. Designing means removing unnecessary access points. It means deciding in advance what gets your attention, what doesn't, what days are for output, what days are for integration, and what happens automatically, and what requires intention. For example, this matters. If your week requires you to decide every morning what you're doing, your week is already leaking energy. Design eliminates that, and defaults matter. When I stopped asking myself, what should I do today? And started answering, what did I design this day for? Everything changed. Not dramatically, quietly. The anxiety dropped. The urgency softened. The mental loops slowed. Because clarity doesn't shout, it stabilizes. And designing isn't rigid, it's supportive. It doesn't trap you, it frees you from constant decision making. A well-designed system doesn't require you to be inspired or when you feel like it. It functions when you're neutral. It holds when you're tired. That's the difference between a system and a mood. Intensity gets praised. Consistency gets results. Intensity looks impressive. Consistency looks boring until it compounds. One of the biggest lies in modern culture is that progress has to feel urgent. Urgency creates motion, but it rarely creates stability. And stability is not the enemy of growth. It's the condition that makes growth sustainable. I stopped trusting urgency when I noticed how often it demanded action without offering structure. If something requires constant emotional fuel to sustain it, it's not built to last. Consistency doesn't require hype, it requires alignment. And this is why long form matters to me. It slows the nervous system. It filters the audience. It creates space for thought to unfold instead of being compressed. I'm not here to optimize for attention spans that can't sit with an idea. I'm here to build resonance with people who can. And consistency doesn't mean doing everything. It means doing the right things repeatedly. And that's where authority actually comes from. Not from volume, not from speed, and not from reaction, but from reliability. When people know what to expect from you, trust forms and trust compounds. Not everything needs commentary. Not everything needs to be processed publicly. And not everything needs to be answered. Silence, when chosen intentionally, is not avoidance, it's containment. Space gives information time to settle, and some clarity only arrives when you stop touching the situation. That doesn't mean you don't care. It means you are enough not to contaminate your decisions with noise. Calm authority doesn't over-explain. It doesn't argue its position. It waits until action is aligned. Silence is a design choice, and when you choose it deliberately, well, it restores your power. Right now, my focus is simple, even if the work itself is not. I'm building structure. I'm building systems that protect energy instead of draining it. I'm building assets instead of chasing activity. That means publishing consistently without emotional theatrics. That means designing income streams that don't depend on constant output. That means honoring commitments to myself, even when they feel quiet. I'm not trying to be everywhere. I'm trying to be effective where it matters. Effectiveness doesn't shout, it compounds. In this podcast, this long form space is part of that design. It's not content, it's structure. Calm is a competitive advantage in a world addicted to urgency. When everyone is rushing, calm sees further. When everyone is reacting, calm chooses deliberately. This episode isn't a declaration, it's a checkpoint, a moment of orientation. Pressure is not progress. Noise is not momentum. And speed is not direction. I'm building deliberately now. And I'm documenting the process. Not for validation, not for performance, but for clarity. So if you're listening and something in this resonates, trust that. You don't need to rush your next move. You don't need to explain yourself. And you don't need to keep pace with anyone else's urgency or chaos. You need alignment, and alignment always feels quieter than chaos. I'll be here, still building, still designing, and still choosing calm on purpose. Make sure you stay tuned. Every Saturday a new drops. So plus systems out on Spotify and Apple. Get it where you get your podcast.